Little girl gave a hidden signal at the rest stop, but 14 police dogs were the only ones who notice. The rest stop sat quietly along the long stretch of highway, a place where travelers usually pause for a moment before hurrying back to their journeys. But for a 6-year-old girl named Mira, it had become something else entirely, a place where she prayed anyone would notice her. She sat in the back of an old pickup truck, her small hands tied with rough rope, every movement scraping her skin, every breath carrying the fear she had tried to swallow since the moment the stranger grabbed her hours earlier. Mira wasn't strong enough to fight him, but she was smart, and she remembered every safety tip her mother had ever whispered to her while brushing her hair before school. The man who had taken her believed she was too terrified to make noise, too fragile to attempt escape, but Mira had something he never expected, the courage to communicate without speaking. She waited for him to step away to get food from the vending machine near the restroom, and the moment he disappeared inside, Mira shifted in the truck bed and lifted her, hands just enough to show the rope to the few people walking by. At first she thought someone had seen her, but each person who glanced toward the truck only continued on. Thinking she was playing some harmless game, Mira's throat tightened and her heart pounded harder as the minutes crawled. She knew if the man returned without anyone realizing she needed help, she might lose her last chance of being found. She scanned the parking lot again, trying to ignore the sting of tears on her cheeks. When she saw a security camera mounted high on the corner of the building, she recalled something from her school. Assembly about undercover, signs people could use when they couldn't call out for help. She slowly formed her hands into that signal, even though they were bound, hoping the camera or someone reviewing the footage might understand what she tried to say. But the camera faced at a useless angle, not capturing her fully. Mira refused to give up. She leaned toward the edge of the truck bed, twisting her torso until her bound hands slipped over the railing where anyone looking from the roadway side might spot it. Seconds later, she heard something unusual in the distance, low, rhythmic thumps, faint but growing louder. She turned her head. Dust rose along the highway shoulder as a long formation of German shepherds, all wearing police harnesses, raced in perfect unison toward the rest stop. Mira blinked, unsure if she was imagining them. 14 dogs moving fast, focused, trained, almost as if they were following an invisible trail. In reality, they were part of a canine demonstration, convoy heading back to the county facility after a public safety event. Their handlers were in vans farther down the road, momentarily separated as the dogs enjoyed their exercise run beside the vehicles. The lead dog, an older shepherd with sharp focus, abruptly changed direction, veering off the road toward the rest stop. The others followed instinctively, forming a determined line, paws hitting the ground like rolling thunder. Mira gasped, panic and hope mixing inside her. She didn't know if they were coming toward her intentionally or simply chasing a scent, but something in the lead dog's eyes made her believe they were coming for her. The dogs closed the distance with stunning speed. The man who took her stepped out of the restroom with a bag of snacks in his hand, stopping mid-step when he saw 14 police dogs sprinting toward the parking area with laser-like precision. His expression changed, his confident smirk disappearing completely. He scanned the rest stop frantically, trying to understand why the dogs were charging. The lead dog locked onto Mira, her bound hands visible, her terrified eyes pleading silently. The dog barked sharply, a single signal, call alerting the others that the target had been found. Mira flinched at the sound, but then felt something inside her ignite. A sense of safety, like someone had finally answered the call she had been screaming in her head. The kidnapper dropped the snack bag and bolted toward the driver's side of the truck, realizing the situation had shifted out of his control. But the dogs were already in full motion. 3 split off to block his path, their bodies lowered, teeth bared, trained to apprehend but not harm unless necessary. He froze, stumbling backward, trying to calculate an escape that no longer existed. Meanwhile, the lead dog leaped onto the truck bed, landing beside Mira with surprising gentleness. It sniffed her, confirming distress, then positioned itself protectively between her and the man. Mira whispered, "Please help me," her voice barely a thread. The dog gave a low whine, nudging her wrist ropes with its nose. More dogs surrounded the truck, forming a barrier, while two others cornered the kidnapper completely. The nearest van carrying the handlers screeched into the rest stop, brakes screaming, officers jumping out even before the vehicle fully stopped. When handler shouted commands, the dogs immediately obeyed, shifting their stance and allowing the officers to take control of the scene. Within seconds, the kidnapper was face down on the pavement, handcuffed as he tried to protest that it was all a misunderstanding. But the officers didn't need his excuses. The terror in Mira's eyes told the truth more clearly than any words could. An officer rushed to the truck and used a pocket knife to carefully cut the ropes, binding her hands. Mira rubbed her wrists, wincing at the deep red marks, and the officer gently asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. Another officer wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, while the dogs, now calmer, sat in protective formation around the truck. By now, a few bystanders had gathered, shocked that they had walked past the girl earlier without realizing she was signaling for help. Mira couldn't look at them. She was grateful the dogs had noticed what the humans didn't. As officers radioed in the successful rescue, Mira kept her eyes on the lead dog, the one who had changed direction first, the one who had seen what no one else did. She reached out with shaking fingers and touched its fur. The dog lowered its head in return, an unspoken promise that she was safe now. And in that moment, surrounded by 14 police dogs and a team of officers who finally understood her silent plea, Mira felt something she thought she had lost forever, the certainty that she was not alone. The officers led Mira into the patrol van with the same gentleness one would use with a wounded bird. And although her hands were free now, she still held them close to her chest, as if her body hadn't yet realized it was no longer tied. The lead canine dog remained near the open van door, refusing to move until he saw her settle into the seat. Even after everything that had happened, Mira's voice stayed trapped somewhere deep inside her. But the officers understood that shock often froze children like this, and they didn't pressure her. The kidnapper sat handcuffed in another vehicle, shouting excuses no one cared to hear, his voice muffled by the chaos of the scene and overshadowed by the quiet determination of the K9 team. As the convoy prepared to leave the rest stop, the officers carefully documented the area, collecting the ropes, taking photos of the truck bed, and gathering evidence to ensure the man would never get another chance to hurt a child. Mira watched through the window, catching a glimpse of the people who had walked past her earlier. Some stood with guilt carved across their faces, realizing too late that the girl they assumed was simply resting had been silently begging for help. But Mira didn't blame them. She had learned in the most painful way that not everyone sees danger the same way. It took trained eyes, or in her case, trained instincts belonging to 14 incredible police dogs, to understand the difference between a child at ease and a child sending a hidden signal. As the convoy drove toward the county station, Mira kept glancing at the dogs running beside the vehicles, their strides confident and their focus unbroken. They didn't behave like animals who had just taken down a kidnapper. They ran with pride, as though rescuing her had been their purpose all along. When they reached the station, officers carried Mira inside, where a team of detectives, a nurse, and a child services officer waited. They offered her water, checked her injuries, and spoke to her in soft tones, each one trying to make her feel safe. But Mira's eyes stayed fixed on the doorway, searching for the dogs. The lead detective noticed. He knelt and told her gently that the dogs would come in soon. After their handlers completed the intake process, Mira nodded without speaking, and something about her quiet determination touched the detective deeply. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, but she was brave in a way that couldn't be taught. A nurse examined the bruises on Mira's wrists and confirmed they were superficial, though painful. Her voice trembled slightly when she said she didn't want the ropes thrown away. They were proof of what she had endured. and somehow holding onto them felt like reclaiming a part of her strength. The detective promised they would keep the ropes safely as evidence, and that Mira would never have to see them again unless she chose to. Moments later, the canine handlers entered the room, followed by several of the dogs. Mira's face changed instantly. Her shoulders loosened, her eyes softened, and for the first time since the abduction, she breathed in slowly without trembling. The lead dog walked straight to her, sitting so close his side brushed her leg. Mira reached down and placed her small hand on his head, feeling the warmth of a creature who had seen her when no one else had. The handler explained that the dog had smelled stress and fear coming from the truck bed, a scent humans couldn't detect. Mira listened, fascinated not by the explanation itself, but by the idea that the dog had understood her message, her hidden signal, even without seeing it directly. The handler added that in all his years working with police dogs, he had rarely seen one break formation so decisively without a command. Mira whispered, "Thank you," for the first time since the rescue, her voice barely audible, but it was enough to make the handler's eyes shine a little. The dog responded by pressing its nose into her palm, an action so gentle that even the officers felt the weight of the moment. As detectives began questioning the kidnapper in another room, Mira stayed with the K9 unit, drawing strength from their presence. Child Services contacted her mother, who had been frantically searching for her, unaware of how close she had come to losing her forever. The drive to reach the station felt endless for the mother, who cried the entire way, repeatedly blaming herself for the split-second lapse at a crowded gas station earlier that afternoon, when her daughter vanished. When Mira finally saw her mother run into the room, she froze for a heartbeat, and then the dam inside her broke. She leapt from the chair and rushed into her mother's arms, releasing a sob she had been suppressing since the first moment of the ordeal. Her mother held her so tightly that the officers nearby felt their own throats tighten. The lead dog, sensing the emotional shift, sat down beside them, almost guarding their reunion. Mira's mother dropped to her knees, hugging her while whispering apologies that Mira didn't need. She held her mother's face in her small hands and shook her head softly, letting her know it wasn't her fault. Detectives informed Mira's mother that the man who abducted her had a history of suspicious behavior and had likely been watching them before making his move. But none of that mattered now. The nightmare had ended, and the heroism of 14 police dogs had rewritten the ending. Reporters soon gathered outside the station, wanting interviews, but the officers kept them back. This moment was for Mira, her mother, and the team that had given her back her life. The K9 unit became the center of quiet admiration among the staff, and the lead dog received a special commendation on the spot. Though he didn't seem to care, his focus remained solely on Mira. As evening settled inside the station, Mira finally found her voice again. She told the detective about the hidden signal she made, how no one saw her, and how she had been terrified it wouldn't work. The detective listened carefully, then told her that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the silent signal of a child who refuses to give up. Mira smiled faintly, touched by the words, and looked at the dogs, who were now resting on the floor around her chair like guardians, forming a protective circle. She didn't know how long it would take to feel normal again, but she did know one thing: she would carry the image of 14 police dogs racing toward her for the rest of her life, a reminder that even when humans failed to see her pain, there were heroes trained to notice what others overlooked. The night ended with Mira leaving the station wrapped in her mother's arms. Walking past the K9 convoy one last time, each dog sat silently, watching her with calm, steady eyes, and Mira lifted her hand to wave at them. It was her final signal of the day, not for help, but for gratitude, and this time everyone noticed.